Do you ever look at certain buildings and just ask, why? Are they intentionally weird and tacky, or just designed with no taste? Is it a joke? Or was it designed by a child? Well, all of those things could be true. However, while it may seem like in the 20th century some architects just collectively lost their minds, there is an explanation for how buildings got this way. It's difficult to categorize these designs into a single cohesive movement. However, some architectural theorists have collectively described them as postmodern architecture. The first time I heard this term, though, I was really confused. How could a style be postmodern? What exactly does it mean, and why do these buildings look so bizarre? Postmodernism is often defined as a response to modernism. However, modernism is already a really difficult term to define, hence why I actually have 2 other videos on that topic. This video is a sequel to those, so I'd encourage you to check them out if you haven't already. Postmodern architecture is even more confusing and arguably the most misunderstood architectural movement ever. This is because, 1, postmodernism is best understood as a philosophy, not a visual style. 2, most experts, such as academics, disagree over its definition. And 3, a prominent aspect of postmodern design is that it defies having consistency of formal principles and style. So how do you define something that rejects being defined at its very core? In 1959, the architect Robert Venturi's mother, Vanna Venturi, asked him to design a small suburban house for her. It is widely considered the first postmodern building. Vanna did not envision a grandiose dream house. She instead hoped for a humble, unpretentious house with a modest budget. Venturi decided to distort the pure order of the modernist box by reintroducing disproportional arrangements of classical elements such as 4-pane windows, arches, the pediment, and the decorative dado, which were considered outrageous in modernism. The exterior of the house was later painted green in 1967 to make it analogous to the surrounding landscape. The modernist architect Marcel Breuer once said,
"One thing I never do is use green on my house because that's the color of nature, and you never do that."
Thus, Venturi thought it would be a good idea. Venturi also designed the house to fit with his mother's old furniture, which included some antiques. Eclecticism was unacceptable in modernism. However, the reality is that the average person's furniture collection often tends to be unpure and eclectic. Robert Venturi would eventually publish several deeply influential books that demonstrate the shortcomings of modernist principles, including Learning from Las Vegas, written along with Denise Scott Brown and Steven Eisner, which I explored in depth in my last video. In his 1966 book, Complexities and Contradictions in Architecture, he coined the phrase, "less is a bore," which is a reaction to "less is more," a saying popularized by modern architecture pioneer Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. Regarding his own design approach, Venturi said,
"I like elements which are hybrid rather than pure, compromising rather than clean, distorted rather than straightforward, accommodating rather than excluding, inconsistent and equivocal rather than direct and clear. I am for messy vitality over obvious unity. An architecture of complexity and contradiction must embody the difficult unity of inclusion rather than the easy unity of exclusion."
Venturi claimed that he wasn't intending on starting a new movement, and while he and many other designers around the world diverged from modernist doctrine throughout the 60s and 70s, the term postmodern architecture wasn't defined or used to describe this transition until 1977, when architectural theorist Charles Jencks wrote the book The Language of Postmodern Architecture. Jencks described postmodern buildings as hybrid structures that are double-coated with mixtures of modern, traditional, and vernacular elements. Jencks also used the word revolution interestingly. He refers to the old definition of the word, which means to revolve back, and saw postmodern architecture as a revolution of ornament, iconography, and pluralism. In the late 1970s, the Staatsgalerie, an art museum in Stuttgart, Germany, which has been open since 1843, held a design competition to construct a new gallery next to the old building. The winning design by James Sterling of Michael Wilford and Associates integrated classical 19th century elements with modern industrial materials and aesthetics, including traditional exterior cladding materials of travertine and sandstone, a glass-gabled roof canopy, an undulating glass facade with apple green window mullions, bright blue and pink pipes that outline the museum's circulation paths, and an inner rotunda courtyard that features traditional elements such as arched windows, columns, architraves, and banded masonry patterns. The historical integration, however, goes deeper than just surface-level visual motifs. Sterling also organized the new Staatsgalerie in a U-shape that is reminiscent of the neoclassical arrangement of the old museum. Jim Sterling, along with many other prominent architects of the late 20th century, was heavily influenced by the architectural historian Colin Rowe, who applied the notion of collage, an artistic strategy popularized by cubists like Picasso and Braque, to the design and planning of cities and urban architecture. Although postmodern architecture is often associated with the rejection of early 20th century modernists, many architects who were former modernists also abandoned their previous doctrine in later decades and eventually became known as postmodernists themselves. These days, Le Corbusier gets dumped on a lot for coming up with ridiculous plans to tear down Paris and replace its historic structures with identical modern skyscrapers. His theories are often used as a prime example of the failures of modernism. However, works from Le Corbusier's later career diverged significantly from his own principles, and those works are often considered to be examples of early postmodernism. In 1954, he designed a Catholic chapel in Ronchamp, France. The organically shaped walls, curved roof, and sloped floor represent a shift away from the rectilinear boxes that characterize his past works. The irregular arrangement of windows that scatter across the walls goes against the principles of perfect mathematical ratios he previously embraced. The glazing also consists of a mixture of clear and hand-painted glass, which appear as modern interpretations of Gothic and Romanesque stained glass windows, a departure from modernist tendencies of avoiding historic references. In addition to re-embracing historicism and ornamentation, Jenks identified another prominent strain of postmodern architecture, one that focuses on fragmentation and improvisation. The Niban-kan, also known as Building Number 2, a mixed-use commercial tower designed by Japanese architect Minoru Takayama, is meant to reflect the chaotic nature of Tokyo's environment by combining different geometries, juxtaposed patterns, and bold imagery inspired by commercial supergraphics. The building also doesn't have any obvious entrance, as the outside public space is brought directly into the interior, further symbolizing the building's integration with the city. This building was designed with the intent of serving multiple purposes and to evolve over time. As I mentioned in the previous video, the modernist model form follows function is often criticized for being rigid and unrealistic. A building's function is rarely static and usually changes over time. This fragmented approach and the chaotic assemblage of not only shapes but also ideas would be further explored by many other designers around the world in the 80s and 90s, which led to a sub-movement of postmodernism that is now categorized by theorists as deconstructivism. So if the radical ideas proposed by modernists in the early 20th centuries are so problematic, why don't we just forget them and go back to building traditional classical buildings? Well, some people are. Architectural revival is certainly something people do all over the world. However, a regression to the past isn't always feasible or preferred. Jim Sterling argued that
we live in a complex layering of cultures where it makes little sense to deny either the past or the present technical and social reality.
By responding to context, architecture can acknowledge change and difference while accepting memory. So how did postmodern design ideas work their way into the mainstream? In the last video, I pointed out that modern architecture likely took off all around the world during the 40s and 50s due to its efficiency in post-war construction efforts. Through a similar lens, we can see how postmodernism's rejection of the formal establishment can be appealing in the context of counterculture and protest movements between the 1960s and 70s. Additionally, certain postmodern theories appealed to political movements that valued individualism individualism and local autonomy. For instance, Jane Jacobs' criticism of modernism's top-down solutions and her championing of grassroots, community-driven, and small business-oriented efforts of neighborhood rejuvenation were embraced by new libertarian movements of the 1980s. The proliferation of postmodernism, however, cannot be attributed to just a few specific subcultures during one period of time. The evolution of modern and postmodern ideas took place at different times and in different ways all over the globe, resulting in a variety of movements and trends that came in multiple waves, diverging and intersecting with each other over time. However, while it may seem like the embracing of diversity in architecture is a contemporary phenomenon that is a result of globalization and multiculturalism, rejecting formal architectural principles through complexities and contradictions has historical precedents dating back to as early as the 1500s. Mannerism is an artistic and architectural style that emerged in the 16th century as a response to the rigid principles of the High Renaissance that predate this period. Similar to early 20th century modernism, the High Renaissance was also a period where architects emphasized the use of strict proportions, balance, symmetry, and harmonious mathematical ratios, which they argued as objective, universal rules in achieving ideal beauty. Mannerists intentionally broke the rules set out by their predecessors by experimenting with more fluid forms, exaggerated proportions, intentional misalignments, ambiguous patterns, and unusual combinations. Denise Scott Brown and Robert Venturi were heavily influenced by Mannerism and argued that the response to modernism is the new Mannerist movement of our time. Therefore, postmodern architecture can look weird and unconventional because it's often a complex layering of multiple histories or a hybrid of numerous contextual counterpoints. It may be attempting to connect past, present, and future, and it isn't meant to follow a particular set of rules of any established style. A building may look bizarre and confusing to you, but perhaps it makes total sense to its surrounding community. The theory of postmodern design was a subject of contentious debate from the very beginning. Some define it as a movement that directly opposed modernism. Others see it as a continuation and evolution of modernism. There is no typical look for a postmodern building because its look depends on the context. So, since the primary rule of postmodernism seems to be there are no rules, what is even the point of defining and discussing postmodern architecture? Well, personally, I think it's still an important topic of discussion because while it's difficult to define, a consistent characteristic of postmodern theory that most agree on is that it challenges what appears to be established fundamentals, questions essentialist outlooks, and considers problems within a multitude of subjective contexts. So, do you think postmodern buildings are distasteful, populist, and superficial? Or do you appreciate a more complex, hybrid, and fluid approach to design? Are there any bizarre buildings near you that you either find ridiculous or interesting? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, everyone, and thank you to my friends who helped me read some of the quotes in this video. You can check out links to their YouTube channels in the description below. If you want to see more videos like this in the future, don't forget to subscribe, and I'd really appreciate it if you dropped a little tip off in my Ko-fi account, but no obligation, of course. Thanks for your support, and I'll talk to you guys next time.